Hey everybody, I'm Joe, and around here I like to talk about monsters. So I want to talk today about running monsters in battle. I want to talk about having them have real personalities, having real ways that they behave, and having them be differentiated from each other. When we run a monster, it's not just a sack of hit points that does 2d6 plus 5 damage or whatever. It needs to be something that feels alive, feels like it makes decisions that make sense with what that monster is. And we get information on how to run them. We get this knowledge when we're looking at a monster stat block. All monsters give us the major 6 ability scores. It doesn't matter if the monster only does a basic strength-based attack. We still see its charisma. We still see its wisdom scores. And why do we have that information? It's not just for saving throw purposes. We have that information because it tells us something about how this creature behaves, how it thinks of itself, how it thinks about the battlefield, and how it perceives its enemies. So today I want to take a look at these 6 ability scores, and I want to take a look at how these numbers inform the way that these monsters make decisions at the table. So let's get rolling. We're going to start with the physical scores. So let's go ahead and start with strength. Obviously, we understand that strength is a way that attacks are made, and this typically means swinging something big and hard and heavy in order to do a lot of damage. But strength tells us something about the way a creature thinks of itself. Creatures with a high strength score are likely to believe that they are a physically intimidating presence on the battlefield. They are likely to think that getting up close to their enemies is not just how they're going to do the best damage with a strength-based weapon. They also believe that their presence is intimidating. It's a tactic that they use. Low-strength creatures are more likely to want to be farther away. They've never been physically intimidating, and so they make decisions accordingly. I would argue a high strength-based creature is just not likely to look for half or 3/4 cover. They've never wanted to or needed to. And even if they recognize that they could seek cover, they might decide that being up close and in their enemy's face is actually the better tactic. So a dragon, for instance, has a very high strength score, and it does have a breath weapon. It could operate farther away. But a dragon is more likely to be up close and personal with its enemies because of its intimidating presence. Something that is a low strength score is much more likely to look for half or 3/4 cover. So next let's talk about dexterity. And a lot of times people believe dexterity is the most important single stat in all of D&D. It informs your initiative rolls. For many creatures, it informs armor class, but not always. It is obviously a method of attacking, and dexterity is one of the more important saving throws. So this is a really important stat, and it also tells us how these creatures are likely to behave. A high dexterity creature is a mobile creature. They are much more likely to move in and out. They're skirmishers. A high dexterity creature is likely to come in, attack, and leave, or fly, attack, and then fly back up. It wants to be constantly moving. A low dexterity creature, think about the way that this works in a battlefield. Low dexterity means it's more likely to get hit. It has very little ability to get out of the way of area of effect spells. And so it wants to get in fast, stand in one place because it doesn't move very well, and absolutely pummel its enemies to death. A high dexterity creature is going to do something very different. It's going to move in and out. It's going to hide. It's going to move from cover to cover. If a high dexterity creature is not moving regularly in its turns, it's not maximizing the way that it would actually act in combat. So let's talk about Constitution. And of course, Constitution is an ability score, and we very rarely think about Constitution as an ability that you can roll. And obviously, if you've got a PC that's swimming across a large body of water, you might do a Constitution check to see if they take a level of exhaustion. But we, outside of that, don't think about Constitution as an ability. But it absolutely would inform the way that a creature behaves and the way that it thinks of itself. So let's get into that. When you have a monster stat block, when you're looking at hit points, the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide tells you how many hit points roughly a monster of a certain CR is supposed to have in order for normal game balancing purposes. And in order to get that number, we have to figure out the size of the creature. That tells you the hit dice that are rolled. And then as you do some math back and forth, the hit dice rolled times the Constitution modifier gives you a bulk hit point modifier at the end. So the size of the creature and the hit point modifier tell you something about how tough this species is, how tough they think of themselves. If you have a creature that has a high Constitution modifier, it is likely to ignore opportunity attacks. It thinks of itself as hardy, it thinks of itself as tough, and so it's going to be perfectly fine moving past the paladin, moving past the barbarian in order to get to the wizard, right? They have no problem with opportunity attacks because they think of themselves as hardy. If a monster has a low Constitution score, they're not likely to do that. They're much more likely to fight the thing directly in front of them because moving past them and risking an opportunity attack, that is a very scary proposition for a low Constitution creature. If you have a creature that does not have an ability to disengage naturally and it's a low Constitution, it is going to try to back up, it's going to look for cover, and if it can attack a creature that's farther away, it might do so, but it is much more concerned about the thing directly in front of it that's going to hurt it more. So think about Constitution as its willingness to take risks on the battlefield. So now we're going to talk about the mental statistics, and let's start with intelligence. And I think that intelligence is actually quite a nuanced ability inside of D&D. So obviously if you have a monster with very low intelligence score, a 1 or a 2 or a 3, it has no ability to plan, it has no ability to coordinate, it's just going to attack, right? And it can't change its behavior based on the creature that it's attacking. However, I would argue at relatively low intelligence levels, monsters are able to coordinate attacks. And I would say that this makes sense because we have coordinated attacks happening in the natural world. One of my favorite examples is the Harris Hawk. Harris Hawks will actually stack on top of each other, and in order to give the matriarch of that particular group a better vantage point in the desert. It'll find a rabbit that's hiding and send lieutenants to go and chase it out so that another bird can come in and kill it. That's a very coordinated attack. It happens in the real world. And so animals that would have, I would argue, from a 5 to a 10, monsters with a 5 to a 10 intelligence can coordinate attacks. They can recognize if it's an appropriate target and they can coordinate. They can't alter their strategy based on the particular victim that they're going after. Up until at least intelligence 10, I don't believe they can do that. Once you go from 10 to 15, they can alter their strategy based on their target. They can sense what these creatures are capable of. They can alter their strategy accordingly. Once you get an intelligence of 15 or higher, they can start to have very good strategy. They can think about appropriate battlefield tactics. They can plan for these particular adventurers and what they are capable of doing. Once you get to higher intelligence, they would be able to recognize what kinds of things a wizard can do, what kinds of things a bard can do, and they can plan for those. And once you get above 20, they can, with almost a preternatural ability, take a good guess at what specific actions these PCs are likely to make in a battle. Let's talk about wisdom. I think wisdom is a really interesting statistic to think about in coordination with the way that creatures behave in a battlefield. Take a look at some of the ability checks that are wisdom based. 3 that are important: perception, survival, and insight. All right, so let's think about what a high wisdom creature would be able to do with those abilities. So a creature with a high wisdom, would most certainly understand its physical surroundings. It would know where everybody was on the battlefield, and even if it's engaged in combat with somebody directly, it would know what was happening around it. It would have that environmental intelligence, essentially. The higher the wisdom score, the more likely a monster is to recognize when they are losing, and the earlier they will run. They have high insight, right? They have high survival skills. They will know when they are going to lose, and they will book it 100%. A low wisdom score, they may not recognize that they're outmatched until it's too late. And at that point, it becomes a fight or flight, and they're more likely to fight because they've recognized it too late to run away effectively. So wisdom tells you, are they going to run? Are they going to try and get away? Unless there is some other reason why they wouldn't worry about it. For instance, if you have some kind of a demon on the material plane where if they die, they just go back to hell, right? They wouldn't worry about dying. But with most monsters, if they have a high wisdom score, they're going to know what's happening around them. They're going to run if they are outmatched. The other thing that they're likely to do, a high wisdom score means they're good at nature and survival checks. And that means that if you have a battlefield with interesting features, as you should, because that just makes battlefields more interesting. You've got water features, you've got cliffs, you've got environmental hazards. The higher the wisdom score, the more likely the monster is to position itself in an advantageous position. They will know the terrain and they will position themselves for the best advantage possible. Lastly, we come to charisma. So charisma is actually something that tells you something about the battlefield tactics as well as the way it operates outside. Now we think about charisma for the outside of battle tactics. Of course we do. It makes sense. This makes creatures more talkative, more likely to try to get what they want through social means. But let's think about high charisma people in real life. High charisma people, we notice them when they walk into a room. They have a gravity about them in conversations. And that means that they are accustomed to being noticed. They are seen and noticed throughout the world as they move through life. So a high charisma monster is not likely to try and hide. It's probably not all that good at it anyway, necessarily, and it hasn't really had any practice. Something that's high charisma is probably going to be very noticeable, and it's probably more likely to engage in intimidation tactics or deception tactics, which are charisma skills, rather than trying to go unnoticed. It's not likely to hide. They're also, if you have a high charisma monster, it's more likely to talk during a battle. It's more likely to try and make deals with the PCs if it starts losing, offer them something. A low charisma monster is much more likely to hide, much more likely to try to get the jump on characters. It's much more likely to not waste any time talking before or during a combat. And it certainly wouldn't think to try to strike a bargain with the players. All right, so this has been a look at how to use the monster's stat block in order to make decisions for the monsters in combat. I hope this has been helpful and useful. As always, YouTube is literally made out of buttons. They're all over here. Press them, and I appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.